Welcome to the OA Amazing Recovery, Passport to Unity podcast series. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ginny, and I'm your moderator today. I will open with the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Tradition 1 reminds us, our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon OA unity. This podcast is part of a series of podcasts taken from the WSBC 2017 Forum, OA Amazing Recovery, Passport to Unity. Please join us on a journey of unity. Imagine the following. You are traveling and find yourself needing a good dose of recovery and OA fellowship. You slide into an empty seat as the meeting begins. Right away, you notice something different. Your favorite reading isn't included at all. The leader is speaking very quickly, which isn't helping your serenity. Uncomfortable, you try to settle in and hear the speaker, only to discover that she isn't exactly speaking your language in more ways than one. You really need this meeting. At that moment, you remember something your sponsor once said. Identify, don't compare. You decide to stay and listen, setting aside any differences between yourself and the speaker to look for common ground and unity. This podcast is your passport to unity. Today you will have an opportunity to hear 2 different stories of diversity. As you listen to these members sharing, see if you can answer the questions they ask. Would you get a stamp on your Unity passport? OA offers literature about unity, which includes a common solution, diversity, and recovery. To stay in harmony with traditions 6 and 10, we ask the speakers mention only OA-approved literature. Those speaking are being recorded. It is considered implied consent to have your voice and your share recorded and posted on the OA website podcast page, as well as other podcast feeds. To preserve anonymity, speakers will use only their first name or a fictitious name. Today's speakers will address topics around unity. They will present a different perspective of recovery, and each speaker will provide 1 or 2 questions along with their topic that could be used as a writing exercise for discussion or meditation.
This Passport to Unity segment addresses being in recovery and being a man in OA. I would like to introduce Don C., who will be qualifying and then sharing on this unity topic. He will also give 1 or 2 questions for discussion or future consideration at the end of his share. Don, please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. My name is Don. I'm a compulsive eater and food addict. Nice to be asked to do some talking about being a man in OA. Let me give you first, as she said, a little bit about my history, 5 minutes or so, and then I'll talk about the subject. I found OA in 1982, so I just passed actually 36 years in the program. They put a big book and an AA 12 and 12 in my hand, where there was no real OA literature at that time, and arguing all the way, I followed the instructions. At some point, I realized that surrender was not actually giving up. It was deciding to cooperate with a new set of ideas that were not mine. Came to the program as an atheist and suicidal and grossly obese and very, very self-centered. I thought I could do it myself, but obviously I couldn't. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about surrender. Surrender was deciding to cooperate with all these crazy people. I didn't understand what it was that they had, but they had something that I wanted. So I argued and argued with the whole disease and addiction model, but eventually came to accept that there was really no other explanation for my insanity with the food. For some time, in the early days, I simply acted as if I had a disease with a physical, emotional, and spiritual component. That's all I had to do, really, in the beginning. Just trust the process, even if I didn't understand it, and do the work, take the actions. As an atheist, the program was very much a personality rebuilding process for me, not a spiritual journey so much. Today, I know that the reality, as I look back at that 12-step process, was that it gradually opened me up to the healing grace of a power greater than myself. Working through the steps, I eventually came to see that the old American comic strip character Pogo was right. I have met the enemy, and it is me. I am the problem. And I learned that I fix my problems by changing me and not other people around me. So I had to let go of the blaming, the resentment, the fear, the controlling, the self-centeredness, the perfectionism, and so forth. The real action began for me in steps 6 and 7 when it became clear that no magic power in the sky was going to change me. What I found out and learned was that you learn to walk by walking, to run by running, and to swim by swimming, to work the program by working the program, and to stop overeating by stopping overeating. Likewise, I learned in 6 and 7 that when I began practicing new ways of thinking and behaving, life changed. I moved from writing master plans for the world to acceptance of reality and to my powerlessness. I moved from blaming to responsibility and accountability for myself. I moved from phoniness to being real and authentic. So I learned to deal with life without comforting myself with food or escaping into the food. That 36 years ago was the beginning of the never-ending journey that I'm still on. Since then, I have been through death, disease, divorce, disappointment, disillusion, layoff, business failure, and I recently added another D, disability. I have some major chronic pain problems. I've never left OA. I've learned to deal with life without comforting myself with food. I'm coming up on 34 years of abstinence and maintaining approximately 185-pound weight loss from my top weight. I work a very structured and disciplined program, which I call my daily treatment plan, and particularly since retirement 20 years ago, I devote myself full-time to OA service at all levels. I base my life on what Dr. Bob used to call love and service, and all the manifestations of those two words. Love, for example, is manifested in patience, tolerance, kindness, acceptance, forgiveness, understanding, calm mind, steady heart. Service, as manifested in sharing my experience, strength, and hope with still suffering compulsive overeaters and doing whatever I can to keep OA healthy. As was said to me many years ago, if not me, who? If not now, when? Now, let me move over to the subject, being a man in OA. I was asked to speak at the 2017 WSBC Forum on what it means to be a man in OA. I prepared my thoughts before conference, but I wasn't all that comfortable with it since it was only one man's opinion. So when I got to conference, I pulled together an ad hoc meeting on Tuesday afternoon of men who were attending. 17 men came to the meeting. Their comments turned out to be much, much better than that of one man, me. What I chose to do at the forum the next morning was to read through the 29 comments coming out of that group of 17 men. And that's what I'm going to do here on this recording. Now remember, these are men delegates to WSBC, so they are experienced OAers in recovery. Here's what they said when asked, what does it mean to be a man in OA? There's some redundancy in the comments, but I've chosen to read them all. All right. 1, men are handicapped in OA because they can't be who they really are. 2, men, especially in early recovery, do not feel that they can be honest. Remember, men, are supposed to be tough and not show feelings, and of course, that's what they learned from day one about being a man. Unlearning that is hard. Showing feelings and vulnerability is the hardest thing that a man can do. It's not just relaxing and being themselves, it's taking down a wall brick by brick. Point 3, listen to how a man talks to a man, and then listen to how he talks to a woman. It's different. 4, a newcomer man walking into a room of women will likely not return. This is a critical point. A man walks into a room of 15 women at OA, he likely will not come back. Not 100%, but likely will not. 5, I needed to be able to identify with someone when I came in. This is a person talking to me now. I needed to be able to identify with someone when I came in. I was a broken man, ravaged by the food addiction and all the social and spiritual disabilities that go with that. There was no way I could possibly identify with women in that room. It was never going to happen, this man said. 6, I need to be able to share, and I really couldn't do that with women. 7, I have a hard enough time being honest with my spouse, and often don't. It will never happen with women that I don't know. 8, even if men come back to meetings, they're likely to isolate if there are only women there. 9, we need to be honest and open to get well, but we must weigh and measure what we say in a mixed meeting. 10, if men do return, there are other factors at work that makes OA different for a man. Following are some examples. Point 11, there are many broken women in our rooms. Not sure about the term broken, but you know what I mean, I'm sure. Many broken women in our rooms. Broken women can be intimidated by men, particularly aggressive men. Another factor, most men are automatically distrusted by women, partly because of their own personal history with men, or simply because we're men and assumed to have ulterior motives. Another point, men are not comfortable sharing about certain things in mixed meetings, the same as women. Another point, in the ideal world, it's clearly better for men to work with men and women with women as sponsors. Working on the steps is an intimate process where complete honesty is required. Men hold back in steps 4 and 5 with women, as do women with men. Men have a hard time showing their weaknesses to a woman. 15, it's definitely better for a new man going through the steps for the first time to have a man as sponsor. And I'm continuing to just make the points that these 17 men made. 16, it's easier for men and women to sponsor each other after they've been in OA for some time. But some men sponsors ask their women sponsees to give their 4th and 5th steps to someone else. It's not ideal, but it does avoid potential hazards. 17, a man said, in my experience, I started in a rehab, and I was lucky enough to have contact with 2 men from AA who I worked with for the first year or so to complete all my steps for the first time. My 5th step was the first time in my life that I had ever been totally honest with another human being. I would certainly not have done that with a woman. After both were out of the picture, these 2 AA guys, there was only women left to sponsor me. It was useful, but eventually we mutually decided it was not a good thing. 18, sponsoring is required to stay abstinent. No men to sponsor means a man in recovery has no one to sponsor. An important point about the 12th step. Next, fewer men means less opportunity for fellowship, for socializing, for just hanging out. 20. Women tend to keep men at arm's length, which is healthy, but not ideal for the fellowship and sponsoring that the program needs. 21. Men often are on stage in mixed meetings. That is, they're image tending. They have a certain thing about being a man in front of women. 22. Men can't reach out on the telephone like women can. Women's spouses are not happy about men calling their wives, and vice versa. 23. While there are many differences between men and women that makes fellowship and support challenging, we of course can help each other. We're not saying we should totally be isolated. 4. Communications with healthy boundaries is the objective. Now repeat that one. Communications with healthy boundaries is the objective. 25. We share a common disease and a common solution, the steps and traditions and tools of the program. We can help each other. We can learn with time to be friends, but in the end, we're still men and women, different animals. 26. There are more men in the program today than there were when I came in, so it's a little easier in some geographies, but in other areas, there are still few, if any, men. 27. Perhaps the best thing women could do for a newcomer man, if there are no men in the meeting, is to have a list of men for him to call, or to ask the newcomer if it's okay if a man calls him. 28, there's a need, an opportunity for more men's meetings. And the last point, number 29, there is a large untapped group of men out there who would come to OA if it were not a predominantly female organization. So that's the summary of what these 17 men said when asked what does it mean to be a man in OA. I have 3 questions for you to consider, and for yourself and for your groups and your meetings. 1, how can your group be more welcoming to men? 2, if there are no male sponsors in your area, how can a man appropriately sponsor a newcomer? How can a woman appropriately sponsor a newcomer male? 3, if there are no men in your meeting, should your meeting have a list of OA men available for a newcomer man to contact? So how can your group be more welcoming? If there are no male sponsors, how can a woman appropriately sponsor a newcomer male? And if there are no men in your meeting, should your meeting have a list of OA men available for a newcomer man to contact? I'll just note here in closing that since the forum last year, a Google group for men has developed. The last time I checked, there were nearly 300 men on there. An outreach list has been developed from that Google group, which now includes more than 200 men, many of whom are sponsors. So there is more and more men out there identified and available to talk to other men. So that concludes my talk today on what it means to be a man in OA. See you at a meeting.
Thank you for joining us today as we explored Passports to Unity. Thank you, Dawn, for sharing your experience, strength, and hope with us. This Passport to Unity segment addresses non-traditional higher power. I would like to introduce Steve, who will be qualifying and then sharing on this Unity topic. Steve will also give questions at the end for discussion or future consideration.
Hi, I'm Steve. I'm an abstinent compulsive eater, or as I like to sing in the shower in the mornings, I'm Stevie, an OA man. Don't eat from a garbage can. Surrender my will, weigh and measure my fill. I'm Stevie, an OA man. Da-da. I am a 62-year-old white male American. Grew up in Jackson Heights, Queens, New York, 11372. I had what I would describe as a pretty normal middle-class American life. My father worked for the city of New York. My mother worked on weekends for a doctor. I grew up having everything I needed never missed a meal, never went to bed cold. So I had everything I needed and some small selection of the things I wanted. So I had a pretty good childhood. On the other hand, I don't remember a time in my childhood when I didn't crave food, when I wasn't on the hunt for food. I believe, as much as I believe anything, that I was born with this disease. Growing up, we always had food in the refrigerator. We always had snacks in the freezer. We always had a cookie jar in the cupboard. And my parents didn't really regulate access to this food. They tried from time to time to incentivize me to lose weight. At a time when $1 would get you 10 candy bars, they would offer me $1 a pound to lose weight. And I never collected on that. I remember when I got my first job, I delivered newspapers, and I would collect the money from my customers, and on the way home, I would always stop at the local Chinese restaurant to get food on the way home. Food really was the central organizing principle of my life before OA. I learned to bake from my mother and to cook in general. I've always been a good cook. I found myself, in addition to being always drawn to food, I was never completely comfortable. And I think the fact that I was never completely comfortable as a person was captured in a couple of different ways, and not just the food, but with being the class clown in school. I had a pretty good sense of boundaries, that I didn't want to cross certain boundaries to get in trouble in school, but I was the guy who was always joking. As time passed, my weight went on. I look back at my pictures from when I was very young, and I wasn't all that heavy as a kid, but it felt heavy back in those days. Time marches on, and in the mid-'80s, I was dating my future wife, and we both had an issue with food. She found OA and suggested I go, which I did. And I got abstinent, but I didn't work the program. Not until 14 years later, when I put all that weight back on and more, getting up to 306 pounds. And I came back in 2002, got a sponsor, started working the program the way it's supposed to be worked, using the steps, having a food plan, doing service. And I took off 140 of those 306 pounds. Sometime after which my doctor suggested I put a few more back on because I was a little too light. And so I've been maintaining about 120-pound weight loss one day at a time. I weigh and measure my food. My food plan has changed many times. I am now a vegan. I don't eat any animal products. I find that to be necessary for me to recover because I was a sarcastic, kind of sharp person. And while I still have some of those character defects, I find that on a daily basis I work to try to be kind to every person in every situation and to offer service. And part of that kindness is not harming animals. I never have. I was never cruel to animals, but I extended that to my food as well. So today I do service. When asked, I've done service at every level of the organization. I do service in other parts of my life. And the reality is because of Overeaters Anonymous, I have a life second to none. Now, one of the things, I mentioned that I came to program first in the 1980s. And I got abstinent and I lost the weight, but I didn't work this program of recovery. And the reason I didn't work the program of this program of recovery began in step 2, where I had to come to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. And in step 3, where I had to make a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood Him. And, I grew up in this nice middle-class family in New York, Jewish ethnically, but not Jewish by practice. I was essentially raised as an agnostic. And over time, I went from agnostic to atheist. And I went from atheist to flaming atheist. The difference between an atheist and a flaming atheist is an atheist, which is what I am today, can acknowledge that they don't believe in God, the traditional God of religion, or perhaps any concept of God. But they don't look down on people who do. Flaming atheists, which is what I was, look down on believers, think they are less than. Because of this program of recovery, I've come to respect believers and accept that we have a different worldview when it comes to the concept of God. So for me, I came back in 2002. I wasn't struck abstinent, but at one point in time, I started working the steps in the HOW program here in Eastern Massachusetts. And I got through step 3, and that was fine. And then I moved on to step 4, and I was really stuck. And so I asked someone in one of my meetings who shared on step 4 a great deal and had a lot of recovery. And I said, could you sponsor me on step 4? And she said, yes, I'll do that. And then we sat down and we talked about it. And after she had a good laugh, she said, Steve, you know what? You can't do step 4 because you really haven't taken step 2. You haven't come to believe that a power greater than yourself can restore you to sanity. So she demoted me, and we started down the path of doing step 2. I did this by using the AA book, Came to Believe, and I read one story a day. And for each of those stories, I sat down and wrote on what I could identify in that story. And now some days what I read seemed to me to be purely religious, and I couldn't identify with anything, and that's what I wrote down. On other days, I could identify with some spiritual concept. And through this process and through time, I came to believe in a power greater than myself. Now, this power greater than myself was born with me and will die with me, and I've shared about this at a great many meetings. And this power, and what I've discovered is there's a great many people in the program who shares this higher power with me, this concept of God, this concept of conscience, this concept of the inner voice that we get in touch with, that I get in touch with when I take quiet time and meditate and reflect on that. So the God of my understanding is a small, quiet voice in my head. And you know, when I talk to believers and I talk to non-believers, you know, almost everybody has that small, quiet voice in their head that is the God of their understanding. And the only thing that seems to be different between myself, a non-believer, and the believer is where we think that voice comes from. For me, it's an internal voice. The God of my understanding is the internal Steve who can live in a world and a space that trusts and doesn't have fear, that lives in step 11 and seeks through prayer and meditation to improve my conscious contact with God as I understand Him, seeking only knowledge of His will for me or the next right thing to do, and the power to carry that out. The power to carry that out is trust. It is the suspension of fear. It is faith that if I do the next right thing, things will be okay. Does that mean that everything will necessarily go my way? No, it doesn't. But it has been my experience so far that they usually turn out okay. I like to use the sort of a metaphor. Before program, I consider an archer who loads the arrow into the bow, pulls back and shoots at the target. Rather than taking time to aim carefully before letting go of the arrow, I used to let it go and then run next to it, trying to make it hit the target in the right place. Step 11 tells me, as an archer, that I take my time, I listen for that good orderly direction, and then I let go of the arrow because I've taken good aim, and I'm not in charge of the results. You know, if a gust of wind blows the arrow off, that's life. But I trust that things will turn out to be okay. And I had a recent experience with that, and it's just absolutely miraculous. I I was laid off from my job at the end of 2017. And I did all the things that I needed to do to prepare to look for a new job, but I still had to go through that cycle of trusting that things would work out. I was prepared to be out of work for a year or a year and a half when 6 weeks after my last day of work, I got a phone call from someone who I'd known from my past, who had heard that I lost my job and had offered me a new opportunity. So 6 weeks after I lost my other job, I'm working again in a job that I think will be challenging and exciting. And there's no question that my experience and program has made that possible for me because I was able to do the next right thing and trust in the results without eating compulsively. And that is a gift. I think that's all I'm going to speak to on this, but I'm going to leave you with this question. The question is simply this. Well, let me back up a moment here. I've had a lot of sponsees. I've had I've had Christians of various stripes. I've had Catholic deacons. I've had Baptists. I've had evangelicals that I've sponsored, and when they've struggled and don't understand why God doesn't remove the problem, I have the same question for all of them. Are you prepared to reconsider the nature of the God of your understanding? For me, everything I know about God I learned in program. I didn't have any preconceived notions because I didn't believe in a God. I had to create my own. And so the God of my understanding completely comes out of the steps. So how has your understanding of God been changed by your experience in OA? I'll bet you it has. And that is your discussion topic or your homework. And I wish you a great abstinent day and take care.
Thank you, Steve, for sharing your experience, strength, and hope about unity. Thank you for joining us today as we explored passports to unity.
Traveling shows us that even though we may work a program in different ways or have different needs, we all have something in common and can learn from each other. Of course, the journey doesn't stop today. We hope you return when other podcasts are ready for you with more opportunities to seek understanding and unity in diversity. Unity with diversity statement. As we extend the heart and hand of the OA Fellowship to those who still suffer, let us be mindful of OA's Unity with Diversity policy, which respects our differences yet unites us in the solution to our common problem. Whatever problem you may have with food, you are welcome at a meeting, regardless of race, creed, nationality, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, or any other trait. The opinions expressed here today are those of individual OA members and do not represent OA as a whole. Seventh tradition. Please remember that we are self-supporting through our own contributions. Please use special workshop meeting number 82278 when making your contribution. The World Service Office needs our support to continue to serve our fellowship. Go to www.oa.org and click on Contributions. Thank you for helping us carry the message. Additional topics for Amazing Recovery, Passport to Unity, will be on the OA website, oa.org, as part of this series. I will close this session with the OA promise. I put my hand in yours, and together we can do what we could never do alone. No longer is there a sense of hopelessness. No longer must we each depend upon our own unsteady willpower. We are all together now, reaching out our hands for power and strength greater than ours. And as we join hands, we find love and understanding beyond our wildest dreams.